Good morning to everyone. My name is Johnny Belk. I'm the board chair of the Belk Foundation. And on behalf of the foundation and the board, we wanted to extend to you a very warm welcome and thank you for joining us. All of us on the board are really excited about the opportunity to learn from Kareem Weaver on change management and reading improvement. This topic is really relevant as letters, training, and new district expectations are being implemented across the state in response to Senate Bill 387 called the Excellent Public Schools Act of 2021, which was signed in April of last year. And it's really about the jarring statistics that underscore the need and emphasis on reading instruction, because we know that only about a third are reading at a proficiency level we deem acceptable. Since 2013, the Belk Foundation has been placing a special emphasis on third grade reading proficiency because it's clear this is a major milestone for that predictor of high school graduation. And today we have the extraordinary opportunity in North Carolina to improve reading in our state with the state board, the legislature, the UNC system, and many others like the governor's office aligned on this important issue, a unique time. While this alignment across the state is critical, we know that it's most important that we get commitment and execution at the local level, because it's the local school boards, the districts, the schools themselves, the classrooms, the teachers, all rowing in the same direction. Today's conversation will focus on how to make this significant policy and funding opportunity carry through for each educator, family, and child. And today I encourage you to follow at Belk Foundation on Twitter and to use the hashtag EdNC if you tweet about this event. Now, I'm really pleased to introduce Kareem Weaver, who's the co-founder of an entity called FULCRUM, the Full and Complete Reading is Universal Mandate. He's also a key member of the Oakland and California NAACP education committees. He's working diligently to improve literacy rates across the country in California, and we're really delighted that he will share his experience and wisdom around the art and science of reading improvement. Kareem, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. And I appreciate the intro. Good morning, everyone. It's good to be with you today, all the way from California. And I think I may have something to share with you. When I was asked to come or invited to come, this state is close to my heart for a lot of reasons, a lot of family in the region, and was trained by some folks who you may know. Dr. Gorman was head of Charlotte Mecklenburg schools for a while, and then some other folks, Dr. Carol Johnson, et cetera, who are considered to be mentors and family throughout the area. So this is really, really an honor to speak to you all today, and I'm glad to do it. So as Johnny mentioned, I work with the NAACP, the state level, as well as the local level here in Oakland. And the NAACP is the largest and oldest civil rights organization in the country. And the reason why I bring that up is because we have advocated for a lot of things historically, mostly to do with civil rights, some human rights, but literacy today really is the coin of the realm. And it's something that everyone is trying to figure out. And we're just now, as a country, grappling with past practices, our expectations, our standards, and what it means for our families, our kids, our educators. And so with that as the backdrop, I'll just say thank you for the invite, and let's get right into it. I have a few slides to share with you this morning. I'll try not to put you to sleep by PowerPoint. I'm going to share a few things with you. It's also good to see some familiar faces out there. I know a couple of folks who are associated with this event, so it's good to be in partnership with you as well. Actually, let me make sure I do this again. I'm gonna do it right. I've been told to make sure all the boxes are checked. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to start with this. You know, we often hear about the science of reading. It's kind of a buzzword nowadays, and that's wonderful. I think it's worthy of study. It's worthy of training. It's worthy of development, et cetera, et cetera. And there is an art to reading improvement as well, and it has to do with change management. That's really what I want to talk with you all about today. And I'm going to start it a little bit differently, as I have a quick video. This individual is my cousin. His name is Cleveland. I call him Boo. He's 1 year younger than I am. And while I was an educator in the classroom, Cleveland was incarcerated. He was incarcerated for a little over 20 years. And when he got out not too long ago, and this is in South Carolina, when he got out just a few years ago, we had a conversation. We were very close. And we had a conversation about education, about literacy. And I want to play just a small clip of that conversation for you. Now, he's a published author. He's written a book and done some other things, but I want to just bring you to this snapshot in time so you can kind of hear from someone who has lived on the other side of these things we're talking about. Is our effort to put social justice around literacy and make that the context in which we push things forward. He had a message for educators. I'm going to share that with you briefly.
75% of Black boys in California really can't read. Many of our educators want to focus on social justice in the era of Black Lives Matter, and we're looking at the long-term view of social justice in America, especially towards African Americans. They want to focus on that. They want to focus on teaching people about their culture and their history. And they see it almost as either or. I'm either teaching them how to fight the power, or I'm teaching them how to read. But I'm curious to know how you see it, the relationship between reading and social justice.
It takes reading to understand the common denominator of social justice. And the common denominator is justice. You have to break that down because it's a two-part word. Social being, everything that you're influenced by, everything that's around you. And then you have the word justice. See, so many times, Kareem, I think we're given what things are supposed to mean. And all we do is we take what things mean to everybody else and feel like it's the right meaning. And a lot of times we're misled because we never applied it to our lives. And when you get to dealing with social justice, social justice, for one, there's no color in justice. And I think that although the intentions are good, educators, because they're also caught in the mix of social justice. And as they're trying to educate our children, they actually promoting social injustice because I believe in self-preservation. We've been dealing with social injustice in the Black culture and the Black community, but at some point, people won't start to take you serious till you take yourself serious. And not to break subject, but I was at one of the worst prisons. No, not one, the worst prison in South Carolina, in the worst dorm. And I'm talking about when I got into the environment, every time they opened the doors, somebody was getting stabbed, somebody was getting raped, somebody was getting robbed. I went into this environment and I took a game of Scrabble and I changed the whole environment. We was on what you call 23-1 lockdown. And when you come out that hour, I got these hardened killers, hardened gang members, people whose heart is hardened. They rushing out. Now they're not rushing out to see what's going on. They rushing to try to beat me at Scrabble. And a lot of times, results come from people that you respect. You know, whatever reason you respect them, your biggest results comes from somebody that you admire, that you respect, that you look up to, that you can identify with. And for months, you know, I came out and, you know, I would just come out and I'll sit in front of the TV on the bench and just sit the Scrabble game down, and I have people standing in line playing Scrabble. And it actually opened up for reading. You know, you was talking about statistics of literacy in the Black community in California and Oakland. But did you know that statistically, the average incarcerated man reads on the 4th grade level? Now figure that into the statistics. You know, you putting people that's been away majority of their lives back out in communities, and they can't navigate their way through reading. Your work, I appreciate it because I've been, you know, in a small section of society, enclosed, you know, around people who just couldn't understand, whether it was, you know, the law, whether it was the rules, and a lot of people is tricked because, you know, ignorance ain't on your side. And sometimes you just have to be downright real with people, you know, and let them know, because you can scream, I made a mistake all you want. But when it comes to justice, justice don't leave room for ignorance. When you're ignorant and illiterate, it kind of tightens the cuffs, because, you know, if I can speak to someone and I can talk over their head and all they can do is nod in response and never understand what I'm telling them, then in some ways I'm pulling their strings,
Right.
because they'll agree to anything.
Right.
So at one point in that conversation, Cleve said, did you know the statistics? Did you know? Now, like I say, he's been gone for 20 some odd years. But he asked me the question. And in the educational world, I think sometimes the general public is disconnected from the education world, K-12, university, higher ed, even legislators. The question is, did you know? Did you know? And if you did know, then what? And I like to take my time and just start with that to kind of ground me and us in the reality and the stakes of what we're talking about. Because, you know, if we're going to be honest about it, these statistics are all over the place. I mean, here are some places that you may have seen the sources down below, but the reality is these statistics are sobering. Did you know? And when he mentioned that the average incarcerated person reads a 4th grade reading level, he was exactly right. And so the reality of our society is that when you have over 7 million people involved with the justice system, incarcerated, parole, probation, no one wants our wonderful country to become a pseudo penal colony. Nobody wants that. From a family perspective, from a moral perspective, from an economic perspective, from a security, national security perspective. No one wants to have our genius and our talent locked up and our loved ones locked up. So yes, the question is, did we know? And the answer is, yeah, we know. For the most part, people heard about the school to prison pipeline and they've heard, maybe some buzzwords attached with it, but the reality is most of us know that something is going on. And so then, in North Carolina, I've spoken with folks. I've had an opportunity, thanks to the Belk Foundation and Joanna, I've had an opportunity to engage with several people. And the answer is, yeah, we know, and look, we've done these things. We passed a law. We have got this new high quality curriculum. Some districts will say this. We've got a high quality curriculum and we're training everybody. We're going to give everybody training. We're going to mandate training, I should say, not give. We're going to mandate letters training. Okay, that's noteworthy. But what I want to, and they'll say, well, what else could you want us to do possibly? Maybe you're a legislator or a teacher or a principal or a parent say, we're doing all these wonderful things. Kareem, what else would you want us to do? Well, let's get into it quickly here. Some of you read that book, Good to Great, and they talked about the Stockdale paradoxes, prisoner of war in Vietnam, and was one of the few people who actually made it back home because he basically accepted the reality of the situation, but he never gave up. He accepted that this is horrible, this is terrible, but I'm not going to confuse my faith that I'm going to make it home with, I'm not going to distort the reality of my situation. I see the brutal truth of the situation and I still have faith. And so we, in this, not just in this webinar, this conference, we have to face the brutal truth of things and still have a faith that we can move past our current reality. Now, that's all fine and good. I mean, we've got these laws, that's wonderful. We've got the letters training and all the rest. And when people close that door, as I did for many years, for the most part, they're going to do what they feel is best and they're going to do what they want to do. And there's no law that's going to change that. I have news for you, I'm sorry. But the laws can incentivize some things and can restrict some things, but it's not going to change that. So you have to at least try to manage change. And some people will say, well, you just tell people to do things and they do it. And we'll force them to do it and we'll make them do it and we'll have this and that and this rule and regulation. And the first thing I want to share with you all is that we cannot mask our inability to lead with the cloak of urgency. We can't just skip change management and good leadership by saying it's urgent and it's important. Yes, it is urgent. Yes, it is important. Nobody wants to send off a loved one to be incarcerated. Nobody wants to see their child struggle learning to read. And if you just force it on people without good change management, it's not good for kids. And it feeds this cycle of cynicism. And ultimately, it's a failure of leadership. So with that being said, some of you may have seen this before, we want to really quickly delve into how to understand change. And there's a technical spot, but there's also the art of it. How do we change as a, not just as a state, but as a school, as a district, as families? How do we get our kids reading, and how do we make sure that the culture changes and the education landscape changes to provide kids what they need in an on-time way? We said, well, we did letters, and that will help people get skills, right? You go to the letters training and you get your skill development. If you had a percentage on it, if a person goes to letters training, what percentage of the need to develop their skills do you think will happen? If they're mandated to go, and so they go, they comply, right? They go. Just, you don't have to put in a chat. If you want to, you can. But what percentage of their skills toolkit will have been built adequately? Well, there's this important concept of pushing versus pulling. Are we pulling people where they need to go, or are we pushing people where they need to go? There is a difference. So when you talk about change management and skills, you can incentivize something. You can kind of encourage and push people, or you can drag them with you. And I know some people in the kindness of their heart, they say, look, we're going to drag everybody with us and we're going to do the right. Okay, fine. Good luck with that. But there has to be some push and not just all pull. And so it's important to really look at other ways of approaching it. Now that's fine. Here's an example of a teacher who I think we can learn a little bit from. She was the Mississippi Teacher of the Year this year. And interestingly enough, she went to some specific trainings. Now you may know that Mississippi is one of the few states, or the only state actually, that went up in terms of their NAEP scores for reading. So if you're the Mississippi Teacher of the Year, lower elementary, teaching reading, we probably want to at least hear what you have to say or what your course was. And what she said, and I highlighted there in orange for you, she did a few things. She became nationally board certified in literacy. Now you can become nationally board certified in art. You can become board certified in a whole host of things, about 24 categories, but in literacy. And she did Orton Gillingham training and letters training, and she's pursuing a certification as a dyslexia specialist. Huh. That's interesting. So she did the letters. She did letters. And then, and having spoken with her, she's from Tupelo. I have lots of family in Tupelo, home of Elvis. It seems that she did more than just the basics. She went beyond just letters training. She did these other things too. Well, in North Carolina, if an educator were to do those things, what is the incentive? What's the push? What's the push of doing those things in your state, right? They said, well, we have some credits that you can earn. You can get a loan to get nationally board certified. You get a 12% bump in pay. The state will cover the difference. Okay, what about in the district? What's the incentive? What about in the school, and what about in families? What are some things that we can do to push and encourage and support folks towards getting the kinds of training that's going to benefit them, their career, and the children they serve, and the buildings they lead? So right now, there are some things at the state level. So if I'm a state legislator, I can honestly say, hey, look, we do some things around national board certification. Great, wonderful. But what if that's in a subject that may not be what you need? We're talking about being board certified in literacy, reading language arts in literacy for early and middle childhood. That's a difference. So we can, and that's one of the gaps that we have, is that people can get board certified in a host of things, which is wonderful. And we need expertise in a specific area along with the new law that's been passed. So these are some things that are currently incentivized. Have you heard about this? Have you heard about the new public-private partnership in North Carolina, where educators get 10 grand for completing 3 of those things? You heard about that? And then once they complete that, after 5 years in either classroom or admin, somewhere in the building, they get another 10 grand and a $5,000 transferable credit, so they can give it to they can transfer that credit to their grandkid who's going to college next year, or they can give it to, or they can further their own education. And it's going to be 10 years, it's going to be reevaluated. And so you got about 100,000 teachers in North Carolina overall. If even 10% participate, which would be a super high number, you're talking about $250 million. Now we just got an infusion of cash from the federal government. The last installment of $1.2 billion we just made. And so that money is, there won't always be these opportunities. But have you heard about this? And especially doing it in literacy and language arts. Let me go back for a second. And what I want to say is you may not have heard about it because it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. And wouldn't it be exciting if we said, you know what? Not only are we going to pull people along, but we're also going to push them. We're going to incentivize things. We're going to make sure, so this resistance that's out there and the anxiety that's out there, we can reduce that. Letters alone is not enough, but you can only pull people so far, especially when they're already working their tails off. So you can potentially overcome that by working together. Now, I know there's some folks here, like I said, from all parts of the education ecosystem. There is a great opportunity and a unique moment right now to work together in creative ways to reduce some of the anxiety and reduce some of the resistance by creating initiatives like that, which actually will spur people forward. Because you don't necessarily need everybody in the building to sign up. What you have to do is get to critical mass. You have to get enough of your kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade teachers to do that, and others as well, so that the knowledge is in the building. And as results come in, conversations happen. Culture begins to change, and you're no longer pulling people along. You're encouraging them along. So one aspect of change management that I want to just cover, and check, quick time check here. So we often think that whatever the initiative is, that people have a simple question. They say, well, if I do this, what does this mean for, and whatever, fill in the blank. But actually, it's a little bit longer than that. It's a little bit more inclusive than that. Change actually sounds like the longhand version to people in the field. How is this actually gonna impact all these different things in an environment that may not be supportive of these changes yet? I might have aligned colleagues or materials and structures. My principal or my coach may not know anything about structured literacy or the science of reading, et cetera. So that's the longhand. And if I agree to change before I understand and am prepared, what does that mean for me? And what does it mean for my career, my position, et cetera? It is important to understand the social emotional aspects of this too. When you say, Kareem, why are you focusing always on the adults? Why don't you focus on the kids? I am. When you focus on the adults, you're focusing on the kids too. There's a time and a place for everything, but you first have to make sure that the stewards are on point and that they have what they need and that their real concerns are laid and addressed. Because if you ask people to change, it can lead to certain feelings, right? What about everything I just did for the last 10, 15, 20 years that the district told me to do and that the state co-signed off on? Are you saying that I should now be ashamed about that? What about my credibility in my position? You know, I am the chief academic so-and-so. I am the vice so-and-so. Well, what does that mean for my credibility if I now am going through this training or I'm taking these courses and classes and I acknowledge that I've been doing something a little bit askew for the last few years? What does that mean for my own credibility in the building? Now, those of us who have been educators and parents know that there's only so much time in a day. And relationships are fragile. And that if you are going to do something new and spend the time to figure out and do it right, you risk loss. You risk allocating time to mastering that as opposed to supporting your family, your health, et cetera. And there is a sense of loss over the time that you're sacrificing. And then of course, just time and peace, and people are angry about that. So yes, letters is good. And then there's laws, fine, that's wonderful. There are now laws on the books that's new, as he mentioned at the very beginning. There's something on the books now that mandates training and provides some support. Great, that's something of an action plan that people think. But what about the resources? And I'm not just talking about money, I'm talking about time. What about the time? How are we compensating people for the time that it's going to take to learn these new skills? And then there are some who think that the law provides the vision. So if you get nothing else from what I'm about to say today, let me be clear about this. The law from the State House does not provide division in the building. It does not provide division in the school district. It does not provide division at the grade level. If you really want to understand change, we cannot depend upon that law or the training that comes with it, which is wonderful, but that is not going to produce lasting change. There has to be a concerted effort to articulate a clear, concise and compelling vision, consistently in an ongoing way. There has to be skill development. There has to be resources allocated, including time. Now, you say you can't create time. Yeah, but you can add other people to it and leverage their time. So that means investing in coaches. And that's one of the things that Mississippi did. They said, we're going to have a cadre of coaches that's going to go throughout the state and going to support our teachers. Until the schools of ed can get on board, this is what we're going to do. We're going to leverage more time and provide that to teachers so they can be supported. All right, so let's get to the quick here. So there's some technical things, right? Here's the science part of it. There's some technical things that we have to do to avoid the anxiety, the frustration, the false starts. And you see the list there. I'm not going to go through it here, but those are the things that we just have to take off the table with technical expertise and efficiency. And those things are non-negotiable at a systems level. So we're talking about K-12 systems. That's just got to be done. That's where your chief academic officers and their designees or the people on their team come into play. That's just got to be handled. That means principals in the building have to do that. Just has to be handled. But then there's these difference makers. And I'm going to spend just a little bit of time here. I know time is running out on me, but I want to spend a little bit of time on these things. So we have to be able to make these 5 cases if we're going to manage change. We have to be able to articulate a clear vision and provide incentives. And I gave you a faux example of what you could do, but there are some cases that we have to be able to make. Yes, a technical case, you know, the research, the science, fine, great, wonderful. You look at John Hattie's research, but the moral case, that's why I started with my cousin. But what is the moral case for doing things differently? If you want people, when they close that door, to actually change behavior in a skilled and informed way, then at some point, you have to commit to making the moral case. So the question is, who does that? And I would suggest that's where parents come in. I would suggest that's where system leadership comes in, and building leadership, and grade level chair leadership, and leadership in the State House comes in. That's where your EPPs or your university preparation programs come in. You have to make the moral case. The institutional case, basically, you know, there are some people who will only respond to the health of the institution and saying, look, we spend 4 times as much on special ed costs as we do in general ed. If we don't do this, our schools are going to be insolvent after a while, we'll contract and then we're going to be able to serve kids. So you can make an institutional case. Then there's the evidentiary folks. You've got to tell them about Clay County, Kentucky, and Lane, Oklahoma, and Seaford, Delaware. You have to show them places where it's working. And then there's the trust case. If I sacrifice, if I open up my time and my family and make sacrifices, is it going to be worth it? Are the risks worth it? Can I trust you that you're not just leading me down a rabbit hole? And you've got to have people who are sincere enough, who are connected enough, who are compelling enough, who are informed enough to make the trust case as well. And those in leadership realizing that it might not be us. I was a principal, some people just didn't like me. They just didn't, whatever, it may have been personal, may have been professional, whatever. But you have to also recognize that we're human beings and we're dynamic, and so that there are personalities at play. Who are the people that can engender trust in the buildings, in the systems, at the university level, the K-12 level, in the State House? Who are the change makers? We need all of these folks to actually make change. So to wrap this up, the science of reading, wonderful. It's necessary, but it's not enough. It's not enough. I mean, you heard Johnny mention statistics at the very beginning, and that's fine, to recognize that. We do know, but then there's these technical pieces and the laws and policies and getting the right curriculum, but that's not enough. It's necessary, but insufficient. It's the art where we get lost. And we have to be willing to ask, as Jim Stockdale said, questions to get to the brutal truth. Things such as, how did we get here in the first place? Collectively, I was a graduate student in South Carolina, the clinical community psychology program. And the clinical community aspect of it is interesting. How did we as a community allow ourselves to get here? With all the research that's out there about reading, What is it about our culture in education that allowed us to follow along rather than question constructively? What is it about our leadership development? How did we get here? What made it acceptable? And does it say anything about our beliefs in kids and what is the threshold? At what point does something become so ridiculous that we just have a visceral reaction and get rid of it? How low do we have to go to be irritated enough to move where we need to move? That's part of the art. Those are the kinds of questions that we have to ask. If you have a building where there's 17% kids proficient of any ethnic group, or 25% collectively, what's the threshold of explosive irritant? When do we question, how did we let this happen? And the political, moral, economic, and you see the other ones there, what are the implications of these things? And that's why I started with Cleve. Because the reality is, unless you have an economic safety net, unless you're able, and many parents do, unless you're able to pay for that tutoring, the Kumon Center or the Sylvan Center or whatever the local center is, to provide the basic foundations of reading that's aligned to the science and the research consensus. Unless you have that, the implications can be gruesome. And newsflash, even if you do have that, it doesn't mean that you want to spend those resources in that way. People are willing, but most families don't just have $20,000, $30,000 to just throw away or to just throw towards a problem that should be handled through the institution that their taxes are supporting. Lastly, we have to be willing and able to show people where it works. And we're going to have some people later on in the panel where they're going to speak to some of the things they've done as they've made progress. But there are places where people have made shifts, where educators have made shifts, where administrators have made shifts towards direct instruction, towards being aligned to the research consensus, and the kids are thriving. You can go on the EdTrust website, ordinary districts doing extraordinary things, and see a list. There's a podcast. They've got, I think they're on season 4 or 5 by now. We can do this. And lastly, we can do this if certain things are present. We have to be willing and able to do those things repeatedly, not just with a memo or a one-size-fits-all mandate, but repeatedly make those cases, develop and maintain those things. And then we have to create an environment where those feelings of shame, the time drain, the loss of diminished cloak of assurance, educators understand that one. Like we can overcome that, it mitigates that so that the changes can actually be permanent, they can be persistent, they can overcome the bitterness, and our schools can actually thrive. Our kids can thrive without being turned into a war zone based on ideological grounds. So did you know? Did you know is the question. Yeah, we know. The question is, what do we do? So I'm going to invite Joanne back in because throughout the day, we'll have a couple of panels to answer this question. What did you do? Right? Because we do know that there's a crisis, as Johnny said, but the question is, are we courageous enough to address the adaptive challenges, the art and the science of reading together so that we can get kids where they need to go?
Oh, Kareem, I didn't quite take into account that I would have to speak after that. I'm trying to gather all my energy. Thank you for that message. I'm Johanna Anderson. I serve as Executive Director of the Belk Foundation. I want to welcome you all this morning for what we believe will be life-changing for many of us and the work that we do. So we're going to take a couple minutes to ask Kareem some questions. There's some wonderful ones that I'm going to pull from in the chat, keep them coming. But Kareem, I want to start with, a lot of the change management tenets that you spoke to could be applied across any educational or organizational change. Why is it so necessary and acute when it comes to reading?
Because reading isn't just a curriculum, it's a culture. There's been a culture that's built up around reading instruction around the country. And in North Carolina, it's no different. From the curriculum that we used to the intellectual agreements that we make that undergird our assumptions and our actions. So you can't rubric your way out of this. And you can't pass a law and expect to get out of it. That those are important technical pieces, but it's the human commitment and a willingness to lay down and open up the assumptions that we've had in the past. The cultural aspect of this cannot be emphasized enough. The culture in the building, the culture in the district, and the culture in the state house. And frankly, the culture in the community, to whereas we're not just responders. We're not like first responders. Instead, we're actually active participants on the front end with a clear set of norms and expectations in a culture of understanding and support, as opposed to blame and finger pointing and all the rest. Now, I understand going hard for your kids. I do that too. And somebody's got to be the adult. Somebody's got to say, listen, when you know better, you do better. I don't need you to evade and all this type of stuff. Instead, we understand that mistakes have been made in the past at the highest levels. Okay, so I'm not pointing my finger at you. Collectively, we're saying we want to do better, so each of us has a role to play. That's not something that we're used to doing in education because the stakes are so high. We're just not used to doing it that way. But it's a new day. And the only way out of this, the only way that the change management can actually happen, so that it's not just forced and a mandate and this and the other, is if all the different stakeholders take up their responsibility and their opportunity, I should say, to move things forward. And that means that, we're going to have to play some roles that we may not be used to playing. But in education, it's absolutely necessary. You can't rubric your way out of this.
All right, that's a tweetable quote, you all. Hashtag EdNC, get it out there. So I'm going to combine a beautiful question from Ebony Lockett with one that Julie Cole lifted up because I think they're related. Ebony says, how can we encourage corporate giving and community engagement? And I'm going to add in Julie's ask about other stakeholders that you work with in Oakland and California and beyond. So other folks that need to be pulled into this work to contribute in a way that shifts the mindset that, quote, literacy, which includes reading, writing, and critical communication skills, is a comprehensive and communal endeavor. So tell us about how to bring in the multitude of partners and players that we need in order to focus in on our literacy in our communities.
So I'll answer in two parts. The first one is, so with corporations, foundations, et cetera, you don't have to wait for a law to do what I recommended. There's nothing stopping the Belk Foundation, or any other entity, any other foundation, any other corporation, anyone who's interested in the public good with the resources to support. There's nothing from stopping to say, hey, listen, we're going to support 20 teachers to do 3 out of these 4 trainings. And we're going to provide them a platform to articulate their learnings, whether it's whatever the medium they choose to use. That's the first thing. There's room for everybody on that bus, right? The state level usually is the last place that it happens. And usually they say, well, it's worked here and it's worked there, so let's scale it up and do it across the state. So that's the first thing. The other thing you asked, there is a perception from many, and make sure that I'm answering your question. There's a perception from many that this is only the purview of kind of like an elite group of folks, the folks who are in universities, the folks who are leading districts or what have you. But how is there room for everyone to get involved in this in meaningful and tangible ways? This is something, and that's why I mentioned push versus pull before. This is something where we have found coalition is critical, mission critical. Each stakeholder group carries with it a certain brand, if you would. I can bring up, the literacy moms in North Carolina, and they've got a brand. I can bring up, the faculty at Duke, they've got a brand. We can bring up educators in Charlotte-Mecklenburg. They've got everybody's got their brand. And unfortunately, those brands get pushed to the side when there are competing interests. But if you go together, literally go together to a state house or to a board meeting or to a boardroom or et cetera, or to a foundation and say, we collectively have these interests and we would love your support with those interests. It's a game changer. That means the NAACP is involved, along with North Carolina's dyslexia moms, along with the faculty at Duke, along with the Belk Foundation, along with, the folks in Charlotte-Mecklenburg. Like, if you go together, you're taken seriously in a completely different way. And that includes parent groups as well, because you have the moral authority on your side. And what you may lack in technical expertise, you'll find that you can make up for it in moral authority, but if you go to collectively, you can actually get things done.
Okay, I have another amazing question that we're going to save for the Guilford panel, because I think they're going to have some good advice on this too, related to how do you restart good change management if you didn't come off great. So
let me just add one more thing before you may transition, but I want to get this in. What I just said earlier, it may sound cute, but it is not easy, because we have become a very tribal society. And everybody's got their niche. And when we talk about the literacy moms, what the name of the group is, like, that's mostly white women. Just name it. And the NAACP, that's my folks, right? So how are you gonna get those folks together to actually push together? So building a coalition isn't just about we have to love our kids more than we're afraid of each other, more than whatever the dissonance is around, gender, race, class, whatever those things are. We have to love our kids more than that. And that's not an answered question, because we haven't done it thus far. Our loyalties are so fixed at this point that it's going to take a collective will to decide, you know what, we are going to work with other groups, other constituencies. And that is not an easy thing, but it has to be done, because otherwise you're going separately and it's not going to work. The task is too great. You don't get in this type of statistics that Johnny read earlier when by happenstance, and you don't get out of it going one at a time. You have to be willing to go together. So that's what I would put on that. In addition to building coalition, you have to be willing to do some repair work and some bonding work, so that there's sinew between the different groups along all the different demographic demarcations.
okay, everybody awake? I think we're charged up. Many quotes of the day there. Let's keep it rolling. We're going to transition now to a conversation, hearing from North Carolina voices on what's happening on the ground related to literacy. And don't worry, Kareem's going to be moderating all these panels, so he's throughout the day with us. We're pleased to host leadership from Guilford County Schools who have been implementing ambitious work in training teachers in reading research, adopting high quality instructional material, interventions in early literacy. We're going to ask them about the art of that change management as well. Guilford really got on our radar at the Belk Foundation when our board reviewed data last fall that showed notable differences in the reading scores amongst Guilford third graders compared to their large urban peers in the state, especially for Black and Brown children. It caught our curiosity. We knew we needed to learn from them. This is one of the many legacies of Dr. Sharon Contreras, who joins us here today with her Chief Academic Officer, Whitney Oakley, Senior Director of Literacy, Joy Cantey, and Principal, Dr. Kendrick Alston. Kareem will ask them a few questions, then we'll turn to your questions. So please fill them in the chat and keep the engagement going there. Kareem?
Hello. So the first thing I'm going to do is provide Dr. Contreras an opportunity to speak. She may want to just take the floor as a superintendent and share a little bit about their journey. So before we start off with the panel, I just want to give the floor to Dr. Contreras and offer her some space if there's any words she'd like to share.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having us today. We've done a lot of work on this, but I always start with a little historical context. So if you would just give me 3 minutes to provide this for us and why it means so much. You know, the civil rights activist Roy Wilkins once said, nothing should be overlooked in fighting for better education. We must be persistent, even ornery at times. This will be good for the lethargic educational establishment and will aid the whole cause of public education. The struggle for access to education has been a seminal part of American history, as you all know, and the specific struggles of African Americans, which make up the largest population of students in Guilford County, has been nothing short of inspiring. I want to just share that my grandparents migrated to New York in 1939, temporarily leaving my 4-year-old mother behind to escape the vicious cycle of sharecropping in rural South Carolina and to ensure my mother's right to an education. That's why they left. My grandfather came to the United States, walked down from the Andes in Venezuela, came through Ellis Island. My grandmother migrated from Puerto Rico through the US Congress when the US Congress passed the Jones Act. And they too envisioned a better life for their children. Their dreams became a reality, and my brothers and sisters and I have 27 college degrees between us. This, however, is not the reality for many children who look like me throughout the United States. Some of you may know, some of you may not know that during the colonial period, the education of enslaved Africans was encouraged to advance Christianity. But when South Carolina passed a law in 1740, making it illegal to teach slaves to write, it all became illegal. To add to the blow, Nat Turner's insurrection encouraged other states to pass similar laws, but African Americans were determined to learn to read and write in this country. If caught, the punishment was severe. Some were whips, some faced barbaric amputations, some were sold deeper south, and others lost their lives. After emancipation, the formerly enslaved Africans attended makeshift schools by the thousands. And the National Superintendent of Schools for the Freedmen's Bureau wrote, in the absence of other teaching, they are determined to be self-taught. And everywhere, some elementary textbook or fragment of one may be seen in the hands of Negroes. In 2022, it's troubling to see then the academic outcomes for students of color. Blacks and Latinos still underperform in comparison with their white peers on all educational measures in public schools. For African-American males, the situation is even more critical. And this is a result of all kinds of things, structural barriers like structural racism in health, housing, income and economics, human services, criminal justice, government, business and industry, and this all occurs in the private and public sector. Today, nearly 1 million students still drop out of high school, and the dropout rates for students in colors are significantly higher than for whites, and the consequences are grave: poverty, unemployment, prison, and even death. So we are committed to making sure that students are able to read. They have high quality curriculum as part of an integrated delivery model, which drives changes in teacher behavior, which leads to even greater effects on positive student outcomes. I feel confident that we are creating clear pathways and experiences for students to be successful in school and life by focusing on the science of reading. And this endeavor will only strengthen our great democracy. We feel we are doing democracy-saving work. I have my team with you to speak about some of the specific things we're doing, the strategies we are employing to make sure that every teacher is teaching using the science of reading, and that we are looking with a laser-like focus and really focusing on the students who are most vulnerable to make sure that every student can read proficiently and has a chance to improve their life outcomes. Thank you for giving me that a few minutes to talk about that, just the context in which we work in Guilford County.
Yeah, my pleasure. I appreciate it. And your team you have here today, you have your chief academic officer, you have a director of literacy, I'm gonna get the titles right, and you have a principal in the building, right? As I believe Principal Alston is in the building, and Whitney is the chief academic officer, and Miss Canley is director of literacy. So I think I want to start with, if you don't mind, Ms. Cantey. So, you know, we can have all the rules and regulations and policies, and you heard what I said earlier about but you kind of sit in a unique spot, right? You kind of in between the chief academic officer and the principals in the building. How are you messaging with folks, and let me step back. How would you, what's important to communicate to people so they're clear about the pathway forward in schools? Because sometimes people get mixed messages, a lot of different beliefs about how we teach reading, but from where you sit, what do you think are the important messages that have to be sent to folks?
Very interesting question. From my vantage point, it's been critical for people to know that they have support. And so throughout all of the change that's happened in Guilford County with literacy instruction over the last 5 years under Dr. Contreras' leadership, one of the mainstays has been, we are going to support you through job embedded coaching, through sessions after school. And so messaging that you're not alone. We are in this together. This is huge change that's critical for our students. And modeling and aligning with the science of reading is key to the success for them throughout their lives. But we are going to support you. We are not going to provide materials and not give you the support you need to enact the curriculum. There's a written curriculum, right? And we can pass that out, print it, distribute it, but the enacted curriculum actually takes place in the classroom. And so our message has been from this office one of support. We are here with you every step of the way to make sure all students have access to that high quality curriculum aligned to the science of reading.
All right, thank you. Dr. Oakley, I'm curious, your hindsight is our foresight. So I'd love for you to just take a minute and share, you know, at this point in your journey, I mean, look, Guilford schools have made a lot of progress. People have heard about it and they've written about it, but from where you sit, and you started off as a principal, but from where you sit now as a CAO, what are the things that when you look back, you said, you know what, it was critical that we did this. It was critical that we did that. And maybe there were even some things that you would have done differently. Can we just tap into your hindsight a little bit about some of the things that worked and didn't work, and what would you consider essential and some things that can be discarded?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it's important. We saw some progress in 1819, and we certainly had some third grade pockets that were more positive than across the rest of the state, but we're all in a place of deep learning loss right now. The reality of where we are post-COVID is, you know, it makes it easy to look back, but we also have to look ahead. And so I think when Dr. Contreras came in 2016, the second time I met her, she asked me where the curriculum was. And the truth is we didn't have one. The teachers, we had the standard course of study and we had a scope and sequence, but we didn't have a curriculum. And so she said, how do we know what the students are learning? And very quickly charged us with implementing access to grade level instruction in all classrooms in literacy and math. I think across the country, lots of places are waiting for the adults to be comfortable to do what's right for kids. I think when we leave it to chance, teachers are carrying a huge load when they're Googling and going on Teachers Pay Teachers. And we know that when that happens, particularly in schools that are largely have students of color, they don't get access to grade level instruction. So I think the fact that we were charged to provide a curriculum to get teacher buy-in, we weren't allowed to bring our recommendation forward until we had at least 350 teachers input on what we were going to select. But most importantly, it's not just about having a curriculum, it's life work. And so, Dr. Contreras pointed out to us that Black students are 14 percentage points less likely than white peers to graduate from high school in 4 years. When they learn to read has a large part to do with how they succeed in high school and then beyond high school. So we've talked a lot about racial wealth gaps and how and when students learn to read, and what we do to make sure that happens has a whole lot to do with their life. And we have an obligation to get it right and to not wait for every adult to feel comfortable. We've also, since Dr. Contreras joined the district, our Board of Education started deeply investing in professional learning. That was not here before. We couldn't do this without the investment in professional learning. Joy alluded to the fact that lots of places are taking the curriculum off the shelf and giving it out to teachers. It doesn't work if we don't have coaches side by side in classrooms with teachers, helping them perfect the art of the delivery of instruction. And we're not there yet, but we do have some tools, resources, and investments in place to make that happen. And I mean, the last thing that I would say is, we know from the research that enabling teachers to use a high quality curriculum with an equal focus on professional learning and feedback can multiply the impact of simply just replacing a low quality curriculum with a higher quality one. And so you can't just do the curriculum. You have to get the professional learning right too. You have to connect it to data, and you have to connect it to life outcomes for children, because it's more than just learning to read.
So Dr. Alston, you heard all that.
If I may.
Go ahead, Dr. Contreras.
Yes, if I may just add to that, I think one missing element of the strategy in doing this work is also working with the boards of education, the governance teams. So Whitney just reminded me that when I came here, I asked that question and there was no curriculum. But when I asked the board, even the board chair said to me that he felt it was an insult to the teachers to give them curriculum. So their understanding of why curriculum is needed was limited, and it's not their fault. It's because we focus so much on the teachers, which is right. We have to focus a great deal on principals and teachers. But when the teachers get weary or they're afraid of the change, they go to the boards of education who push back. So I would just make sure that part of the strategy, even in funding and the execution, is making sure boards understand the research behind high quality curriculum and why this is a viable strategy for improving reading in the district. And I will also say the same board members who will be very frustrated about low reading performance, low reading proficiency, will vote no on contracts for better curriculum or for providing coaching to teachers, literacy coaching. So I think that while I immediately did work with my principals and teachers, and I did some work with boards, there's very little national work or strategy directed toward the boards of education.
The boards need professional development as well, and it's difficult to come by. Dr. Alston, when you hear about what the leadership in the district was doing, the superintendent, the chief academic officer, and their vision, and also Ms. Cantey, like they had a sense of where they wanted things to go, and leveraged teachers' voices and got a new curriculum. But in the building, because when people close that door, hey, it is what it is. How do you get people in the building to make those kinds of switches, to be open to change like that?
So that is a great question, Kareem. I would say first, it starts with me as the building leader in the building, that I have to make sure that I help provide that compelling vision, that I help create a sense of urgency in the teachers that, it's always the right time to do the right work. And so making sure that I frame change the right way. You know, when we talk about this work of improving learning outcomes for our students, you know, you talked about the fact that it is not easy work. You know, it is a balance that I often have to make sure that I find as a principal, understanding that there is a time that my teachers need a push, but there's also a time when they need some support and they need me to work alongside them in this work that we are embarking on. And so even when I think about the training that we're in the midst of with letters, having a chance to go through this training myself has been very eye-opening for me. I remember working on the first session one weekend and emailing Joy and someone else in the district, like, this has stretched me in a way that I haven't thought about reading this way. Or, you know, the training that I had years ago in my master's program, I'm realizing that there were some things that were not really best practice. And so for me, engaging in this work with the teachers, I think is important that they see that I'm an ally with them, that we're working through this together. You know, if the school is truly going to operate as a true professional learning community, they have to see me, in a sense, in the trenches with them. And so it is certainly a balance that we continue to, you know, make sure that we work through. But it is something that, again, that when we talk about in our meetings, I try to make sure that I frame this work the right way. You know, yes, it's hard work. Yes, it can be draining at times. But when we think about the benefits of this, and we think about the impact that it's going to have on our students, you talked about this moral obligation we have as educators to engage in this work and improve learning outcomes. It is truly great work that we are doing. And so for me to be in a unique situation, this is my second year here in Guilford County, I quickly saw our strategic plan. It was embedded in everything that we did and that we do here in Guilford County. And so to see in our strategic plan, you know, this work of dismantling those barriers that are impeding academic progress, it is not something just plastered somewhere, but it is truly embedded in the work that we do. And to see it just embedded in everything we do, it has been very inspiring for me to be a part of this work and be a part of such a great team here in Guilford County. So, and let me know if I'm talking too much. I get so excited when I talk about this, so I don't want to take up too much time.
Listen, this is one of those things where, you know, it's worth talking about. We need to talk about this. I do want to go to Director Cantey. You know, he mentioned his professional development as a principal. Now, oftentimes when we think about science of reading and we think about all these shifts, we really tend to focus on the teachers. Rightfully so, they have to, you know, have their PD. But how have you all supported the principals or the building leaders so that they can be part of this thing?
Yeah, we spend a large amount of our time with the principals first. And we've made a concerted effort not to roll out anything in the buildings that the principals are not trained in. So we have 4 different principal training programs. So we work with our veteran principals. We work with principals who are new and they have executive coaching. And we also specifically work with Black and Brown male principals in 3 different groups, and sometimes they come together, but we support them with this, making sure that they can support teachers with the science of reading. And then our Parent Academy also offers sessions for parents so they understand how important this is, why there's a change in the way that reading instruction is taking place in our schools. But the principals come together multiple times, and then we have coaches for every single teacher and a lead coach. And these are external partners. These are not coaches that are permanent employees of the district. We have an external partner that comes in and they work with the principals to make sure they can support the teachers when they are in there coaching our teachers every single month. And in some of the lowest performing schools, those teachers are coached multiple times per month, and the principals are expected to be in the rooms while the teachers are being coached, so that at some point, there's a gradual release. So I think another strategy that I continue to emphasize with our DPI is don't just roll out the training, provide the funding for the coaching, for the ongoing job embedded coaching for our teachers and for our principals.
Thank you. Ms. Cantey, did you want to add anything to that as well?
I think the only element, other element would be that this work is relational in education. And so we really, as a department, have tried to make sure that our principals know that if they have a question, they can come to us. And I say that because, as you stated earlier, maybe in your keynote, if you're the leader of a school, it can be in an uncomfortable place that you have some learning to do. And so they know that they can come to us if they have a question to strengthen their own capacity as it relates to early literacy. In the building, they have to be the leader of that work. And we want them to know that they can come to us and get the right answers. And so it's been a huge piece on Friday night. It's nothing for a principal to text me or call me. I'm thinking about this. Can you explain phonemic awareness to me one more time? And so that relational piece of knowing that they have go-to experts that they can rely on as they are going and building their own capacity in the areas of reading and early literacy.
Thank you. You know, I thank you also, Dr. Contreras. You answered one of the questions in the chat about retention. There were some questions about retention and whatnot. And so I appreciate you answering that there. But I do want to also lift up, you know, that's something that it's one of those things where there's the bumper sticker on it, and then there's the reality of it. So for example, in Mississippi, they have the retention policy and people are up in arms, but in reality, they don't really retain very many kids at all because you're identified through that policy and then you get certain supports. But the policy allows there to be a conversation about, listen, we got to do something. I mean, there's a balance. You don't want to punish kids. You know, that doesn't work. And at the same time, at what point do you say enough is enough and we're going to have to do something different, and there are going to be some supports made available to this kid and family and teacher so that we can get them where they need to go. So that's a complex issue. Thank you for jumping in on that. And I wanted to pivot to Dr. Oakley again and just say, or just ask, if you had to do it over again, are there any things that you've done that you would have done differently? And then after she answered that, I mean, this is open for anyone after she jumps in, but you know, we would love to hear you some of your hindsight, or not that you would have eliminated it, but that you may have tweaked it a little bit or made some shifts, and anything in particular that you can recall?
I wish we had started sooner. You know, I don't think any student can afford to wait for all the adults to be comfortable and on board. Prior to Dr. Contreras coming, there was only one thing that our board adopted that they made students do, and it was only a 25-minute block of time. And so I just feel like I think about the students who are still graduating without the skills that they need to be successful in the post-secondary space and what that means for them. I think the superintendent and I, shortly after curriculum implementation, went out and had 13 meetings with teachers. And I remember it very clearly. We listened to veteran teachers and rookie teachers talk about having a curriculum for the first time. We called them Let's Talk sessions, and we did 13 of them. And, you know, so I think what I would say is listening on the front end and start not waiting to, once you know the right thing, to execute. And I think, you know, it's very important to bring people along. It's very important to invest in the professional learning. But this year's, our fourth graders this year are as the first cohort of students in Guilford County schools that have had access to a high quality curriculum since their first day of kindergarten. And I can't wait to see what that looks like, even with the 2 disrupted years of school. But think about the students across the country who don't have that access. And then I also just think about the gap between the higher education space and what we know now in the K-12 space about high quality curriculum. So we're spending a great deal of time unteaching things to teachers who are coming out of programs who are not teaching the science of reading, who have not followed the research. And so there's many universities very close to us that are still teaching guided reading to their student teachers. And then they come to us and we say, no, this is what we know about how students learn to read, and this is how we deliver literacy instruction in Guilford County. So I think there continues to be a real opportunity for our higher education partners to get on board and support that work as well.
Dr. Contreras, when you hear Principal Alston talk about how he's getting people on board in the building, I'm curious, because sometimes we start initiatives at the top. What actually happens, in the classroom and in the field, in the building, may not line up with our vision. Does what he described align with what you envisioned? And how are you able to check every now and then that those things lining up, that what you're thinking you want to have happen? Because you got different layers here. You got Dr. Oakley, you got Ms. Cantey, then you have Principal Alston, then you have the teacher, all those different layers. How do you make sure that what you're envisioning actually shows up in the building? And listen, I'm sure every superintendent across the country wants to get an answer to that.
That's such a good question. And I would hope that Dr. Alston would say that we spend a great amount of time on the why and helping principals to explain the why, which is why I gave that historical context. Because when I sit down with teachers and remind them now, remember 40% of my teachers are African-American, which is unusual in this country. But when I remind them of our collective struggle to learn to read, our collective history, and even our white teachers here, this is Greensboro, the home of the sit-ins. They get inspired by that. We're not doing this because DPI told us this is the latest thing we have to do. We're doing this because we fundamentally believe in it here. We believe in struggle. We believe in progress. We believe in equality. We believe in equity. And so we spend a lot of time with the principals so that we all say it in the same way, and that principals are not going into buildings and saying, okay, central office is making us do this new reading initiative. What is this really about? And we talk about the struggle internationally for girls learning to read. We talk about incarcerated youth, how many Black and brown youth are incarcerated and what their average grade level reading proficiency is. We give all of that data nearly every single month because we get weary, we get tired. It's one more thing. But we remember when we have those conversations, like, okay, we're doing democracy building work here, democracy sustaining work. This is about creating a more perfect union where everyone has a voice and can participate equally because they have the knowledge and skills to do so. The principals are inspired by that. They go out and inspire their teachers. And I think if we can't explain the why, then we shouldn't be doing it.
Well, I would piggyback on that and say, not just the why, but you mentioned in an ongoing way. That you said every month or so that message goes out. There's so many superintendents across the country start an initiative. There's a big rollout. Maybe the chief academic officer makes some announcements as well. And then they're expecting everyone to just kind of go along. But if it's not in an ongoing way, people come and people go and, things shift, but people will forget the why. And when you forget the why, everything becomes more difficult and people can lose energy and lose focus at the drop of a heartbeat. So thank you for that. I'd like to shift just a little bit. So you mentioned coaching. Dr. Oakley mentioned coaching. Others have mentioned the coaching. The resources that it takes to do something like this. First of all, getting a new curriculum isn't cheap. The resources, the materials, everything that goes with it. And then the coaching, outside coaching as well, that's got to cost a little bit of money. How do you handle the financial side of this? How are you able to do this in a way that is not just great on the front end, but it's sustainable over time? That we don't just have coaches this year but that we can have coaches next year, that we just don't have a new curriculum this year, but we have the resources to replenish as needed going forward. And I'll ask Dr. Oakley, this is the Chief Academic Officer, how do you handle that? How do you make sure that the program, the curriculum is well resourced, that the training is ongoing, and that we don't get undercut by, you know, a dearth of resources?
Yeah, I can start and others can certainly fill in, but it all has to do with the priorities that are set forth in the budgeting process. And so Dr. Contreras holds us to ensuring that we show data by subgroup, by group of students, that we look at our English learners, that we look at our Black students, our students with disabilities, and that we put that data at the forefront of the budgeting process on the front end, the decision-making process. And so we are aligning limited resources with what matters most. And so when we don't have a Board of Education meeting where we don't put disaggregated data up and have hard conversations about the current state and the desired state and how we get from point A to point B. We're all accountable for that data, and it is the why. So, you know, we know that third grade reading is too late to fix the problem. And so we use the narrative and we use the data to align those budget priorities. I think most people will remember under the previous federal administration, the Title II budget was on the chopping block several years in a row. And that was a real moment of panic in public education, that they were just going to cut the only federal funds that are allowable to use for professional learning. And so Dr. Contreras very quickly helped us think about how to leverage other title dollars to make sure that we have a sustainable plan. We also make sure that we tier our professional learning. I think she mentioned this a little bit earlier, but the students, the schools who have the highest number of new and lateral entry teachers have more coaching days. And so you don't just blanket the treatment. You think about who needs the most resources, and then help principals understand the importance of coaching. For a long, long time, Title I dollars have been used to reduce class size with no research or effectiveness to show that it's working. Instead, making school budgets for Title I align with coaching resources and doubling the number of coaching days that they have in literacy and in math can have a real return on the investment. We know that highly effective teachers generate 5 to 6 more months of student learning each year than a poorly performing teacher. And so investing in the skill set of the teacher is something that is unmatched in terms of what it means for student outcomes. And so I would say that using the data to set the budget priorities is something that the superintendent has led since she's come. We've stuck to that. We're going to face the same cliff as everyone else in the summer of 2024 when these ESSER dollars run out. And so it's going to be critically important to be strategic between now and then so that we're able to sustain these efforts moving forward. I don't know if Dr. Contreras wanted to add anything to that. Okay.
So
I just want to piggyback for a second, Dr. Oakley, on that. You know, I think for me, just as a building leader, when I think about that sustainability, it's very important for me to really make sure that I'm focused on building capacity. And so making sure that, you know, in addition to the resources that we are provided in terms of curriculum facilitators, you know, those teachers who have an opportunity to serve as multi-classroom leaders, but also thinking about things like my school improvement team. You know, am I building the capacity of my school improvement team to really operate through the lens of how they help drive high quality instruction across our school, and how they support that work and help drive this work as well. And so with any initiative, you know, that sustainability is key, not just the financial piece of it, but also that human element of how we build capacity to ensure that that sustainability is able to prevail as well.
So I'm going to ask a question the opposite way. What if you're in a school district and it wasn't rolled out well? You all have done this very intentionally. You have an aligned team. I can't tell you how many districts I've worked with where the chief academic officer thinks one thing, the superintendent's on a different page. It happens. Right? But you all are an aligned team. But what if you're, let's say, a principal or a teacher and things aren't aligned. It was rolled out in a mandate, just mandates. And so there was no buy-in. There was lack of understanding. You know, the first they ever heard about the science of reading was the letters training that's coming down from this, you know, those situations exist, and it's almost like they need to do a reboot. What would you say to folks who are in those kinds of situations where it's just murky and it's cloudy and they're not quite sure where to restart because the original start wasn't very well rolled out? Anyone want to take a stab at that?
Well, I think, again, more work would have to be done with the boards and superintendents. Like the level of knowledge of letters, I've actually been using letters for 20 years in various districts. I had a meeting because I'm on the executive board of the state superintendent's organization, where there was a presentation about letters, and it was sort of generic. You know, this is important. The state of Mississippi has seen success with this, but it didn't really build a case for why you should do this and provide strategies for how you could roll this out successfully in the midst of a very difficult period for us as school leadership, as district leadership, when we're trying to navigate COVID. And so I could sense it felt like just one more thing we're trying to do that may or may not be successful. So again, I'm going to make the case for providing support for the why with school boards and superintendents up front, and then helping them with the actual execution. Come up with plans instead of just saying all of the teachers in your district are in cohort 2 and need to roll this out by X date. Actually helping them come up with a plan and to look at their budgets. And this is how you can provide extra support for your district, knowing the context of in which your teachers work, your principals work, where they are, how many lateral entry teachers you have, where your principals are with knowledge of the science of reading. So I think just working more directly, providing direct support to school district leaders would be very helpful.
And let me just add to that as well. Thank you for that, Dr. Contreras. Let me just add to that as well. There is a role for community engagement. You know, a lot of times, so we talk about mandates from a legislative or a policy perspective, but there are also community.
Oh, Kareem, you unmuted yourself. Come back to us.
I'm sorry, I don't know where I left off with you all, but I was just saying that there are different kinds of mandates, and the communities have mandates as well. So sometimes when the rollouts don't go well, it's often because the why isn't clear. And you have people going at things alone. So I would step back. If I'm a teacher or I'm a principal, I would double down on my why and start small. It may just be 1 or 2 classrooms. It may be a grade level. You may not have money to provide professional development to the whole building for a certain thing, but you can do it at a grade level. And you can do it for 1 teacher. And you can have that difficult conversation that you need to have with leaders in the building, and you can get parents on board. So if you have to do a restart, I mean, what Dr. Contreras said was absolutely right. And, you know, like they said, the best time to start is now. And that means getting people on board from the community lens, as well as in the building itself. Joanna, do I have time for one more question or not?
No, unfortunately, no. We'll try and wrap it up.
Killing me.
I know. We knew this would be tough. Man. We've left y'all wanting more. Even though what you gave us, Guilford, was an incredible model of aligned leadership and commitment. So thank you, not only for this time, but the model you're giving our state. We specifically placed our next 2 guests after the break to lure you all back. Our state is so fortunate to have Eric Davis at the helm of the State Board of Education. Eric is going to say a few words before introducing Eugenia Floyd, our North Carolina Teacher of the Year. Eric, we're honored to have you zooming in today.
Oh, well, thank you so much, John. I tell you, on behalf of my colleagues on the state board, we really appreciate the Belk Foundation. We would not be making the systemic changes across the state that our students need in literacy and other areas were it not for your foundation. So thank you so much for the partnership. It's something that we really cherish. But I'm delighted to introduce to you one of my heroes, Miss Eugenia Floyd. We all know that she's the 2021 Boroughs Welcome Fund Teacher of the Year. And in that role, she serves as an advisor to the State Board of Education. But what might not be as apparent to you is how fiercely she advocates for students and teachers in North Carolina. Eugenia always places students first and diligently challenges us to ensure equitable opportunities for all students, providing culturally relevant experiences for each and every student that she educates. And as she stated this week, she works for students as their needs always come first. You know, one of the many things I admire in Eugenia is her gift of using personal experiences to connect with her peers and her students. And I've seen her use this gift to effectively raise questions to compel those of us in decision-making authority to make better decisions on behalf of our students and teachers. So my colleagues and I really cherish the advocacy Ms. Floyd provides and is thankful that the students and staff at Mary Scroggs Elementary are willing to share her with us, because she's making a lasting impact in our state, influencing policy and practice, and continuing to make North Carolina the best place to teach and learn. So please join me in welcoming my hero, Miss Eugenia Floyd. Ms. Floyd.
Wow, Chairman Davis, I'm your hero for real? Oh my goodness, thank you so much for those very kind words. I first and foremost want to bid you all greetings from Mary's Elementary School. I am in my classroom because this is where the magic happens for children. And although my classroom is like a storage facility, they have some small groups in here, it is my place. It is where everything and the magic happens for kids, because like Chairman Davis said, that's exactly what I work for. They are always at the forefront of my mind and at the forefront of my work. So I would first and foremost also like to thank so much Chairman Davis for that introduction. And also thank you for always being an active listener to myself and all of the other advisors to the North Carolina State Board of Education. We are truly grateful because it is a sacrifice to come out of your classroom and do that work. So thank you, Chairman Davis, for recognizing that sacrifice and being an active listener. Now, we all know that the most valuable asset that can affect student outcomes is having highly qualified educators in front of children. And the education needs for children are vast. One size does not fit all 1.5 million children in North Carolina public schools. We got to do something a little different for each. And because of this, it's vital that we continue to invest in the professional learning growth of educators. It is essential that we continue to add those instructional tools to the toolboxes of educators. When educators have the professional tools for success, beautiful learning experiences happen for children. For example, I'm in my classroom right now. And as an educator, part of my job is to always meet the children that come into my door exactly right where they are. And in my 8 years, I've had a wide range of students in my classrooms, especially when it pertains to reading at different areas of their reading life. When working with children, I've had students that are working on letter sounds, had students that are answering basic within the text comprehension questions. I've had students that are making connections and inferences about characters. And I've also had some children who are actually using quoted text evidence to prove theories and thoughts about characters. And all of those skills and all of those strategies happen at a range of different reading levels in my classroom. It can be challenging to support so many different needs in only a school day. But when I have the resources in place for success, the learning and the atmosphere in the classroom is euphoric. There is nothing like seeing children in my classroom read independently. It is one of the most exciting parts of my day, because sometimes that silence is interrupted by a big ha 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 ha, or there you could see kids go wide. When you see that, kids are having, when they have the access to books for reading, their reactions to the books not only show that they're showing understanding, it brings a complete joy to anyone that witnessed it. In these moments that you learn that a new world has been unlocked for children. And then there are those times where that doesn't happen for kids. Times when the right tools haven't been accessed to create that spark of reading and comprehension. And that is why investing in the professional learning and educators is important, especially in this area. And I will leave you all with this last thought. Just like we do for kids, we have to make sure that we also give teachers and all the people who serve our children the right tools for their success as well. I want to thank you all so much for allowing me just to say a few words about the wonders of reading. Today is a special day at Scroggs Elementary, as we just had our African American read-in, where we had members of the community, and I'm so and they didn't actually come, but we had a virtual read-in, and I'm so excited that today, Chairman Davis, one of your members, Mr. James Ford, actually got to read to the 5th graders at Mary Scroggs Elementary School virtually. All of those powerful moments are important for children, and I'm so glad to be an educator that can spark it for children. Thank you all so much for all that you do.
Eugenia, thank you so much for reminding us about the magic that happens when children learn how to read well, and the magic between students and teachers that occurs every day across every corner in our state. We are now going to bring a panel forward that is really just a superlative for most valued advisors and heroes to the Belk Foundation. It makes me just giddy to think about them all on the screen together. The 4 folks joining us today are going to talk about how communities, families, and districts should work together to make sure that we're meeting the literacy goals that we all share. These people have really shaped the way that our foundation thinks, and they have opened our hearts and minds over the years. Rupen Fofaria's reporting of literacy practices across our state via EdNC is nationally renowned. Dr. Devanya Govan-Hunt leads the Belk Foundation partner Black Child Development Institute here in Charlotte. And I want to tell you that Devanya is the epitome of walking the walk. Every powerful word she preaches is backed up by how she engages in community. Dr. Monroe Richardson is our exceptional executive director at Reach Charlotte, and he's managed to transform the way that our community is thinking about evidence, implementation, and scale. And finally, Erin Swanson joins us from Edgecombe County Schools, where she has diligently kept the spirit of innovation and focus on what's right for children core to that district's being. Kareem will ask the panel some questions to start. And again, we will hold some time for questions for you all. So please make sure you're directing those questions into the chat or send them directly to me. Kareem?
Thank you, much appreciated. Wow, what a powerful group you've assembled. Looking forward to the conversation, everybody. I hope you don't mind me getting in your business a little bit and asking you some questions. So I always like to start off with folks that are connected to parents. So I'm going to start with Dr. Van Hunt. So let me ask you this, if you don't mind, just starting off. From the perspective of folks who have kids in schools, particularly Black children, but it could be, it could be other kids as well. This effort to raise reading scores and student achievement and all this, do you think, what's your perspective about awareness? Do people have a sense of what's going on? Do they have a sense of the why? Is it being communicated well enough? Are families engaged enough? I'm curious about your perspective of where community groups, parents sit in all of this.
Thank you. First, let me just say thank you to Johanna and the Belk Foundation for having me in this space. And I'm so excited to share this space with everybody here. I'm among genius. Woo. But thank you for that question. And I am going to go back to something that you said in your keynote. The question that you asked, or a statement that you made, was like, we know what's happening out here in the community. We know it's happening from a parent's perspective, and from based on conversations and interactions that we've had with our community groups, our parent groups, with other nonprofits or grassroots that are on the ground working directly in the community. They know what's happening with our children. They know the sense of urgency that exists. They've always had a sense of urgency in terms of helping their children to grow in literacy. There is a lack of trust, though, because we've had these conversations over and over and over and over again. And whenever a new term actually exists or comes about and starts being spread all over the community, to them, it's like, okay, here's this other thing, but who's really listening to me? Who's really valuing all the things that I bring to the table as a parent? All the dreams, hopes, and desires that I have for my child to grow in literacy, to grow in their academic experience, to grow as a lifelong learner. Who's really listening to me and willing to meet me and my family where we are in order to help boost my child forward? So they know, they've always had a sense of urgency. Parents want what's best for their children at all times, at all times. And the use of deficit language in our community sometimes about what they won't do, what they are knowledgeable about, or what they're willing to do for their children. Sometimes it kind of weighs heavy on the trust that they have with the system. So they know.
You said a mouthful right there. So if you have a child and your child is struggling in school, and they call you or whatever, they send a letter home, whatever it is, you get the word. Your child is struggling and they're a problem, whatever it is. How that's communicated matters.
Yes, it does.
And as parents, you want to give the school system the benefit of the doubt. That's the school. At the same time, you know your child. You know your child is not crazy. You know, when you send a kid to school, they have ways, don't get me wrong. But sometimes there's a disconnect sometimes the families experience between. You mentioned deficit language. Mm-hmm. And that's not to say that people believe that kids are perfect. It's not saying that. But there are some things that educators say in an attempt to explain the disconnect. But how parents experience that is, well, let me ask you, when you hear from parents, that deficit language, when we get it from the school, the officials, the teachers, the principals, or whoever, can you talk about how that lands? Because I don't think people understand that. Because in the building as educators, sometimes they just talk about it as if it's normal. But right. Parents experience that as a problem. Can you just speak a little bit about that, how that deficit language lands on parents?
Absolutely. It sounds like a bunch of white noise. Let me just say that. But we try to encourage our educators in our school people in our school buildings to think about how to reach parents where they are and be culturally relevant and responsive. Parents will listen to what's relevant for them. When you call parents and tell them with all this, what your kid is not doing, how your child is not performing, and you fail to realize the strengths that they actually bring to the table, they kind of tune all of that stuff out. And it doesn't come across as you have their best interest in hand. You're not seeing children within the context of their entire family, right? So Our parents, most of the time, are doing what they think they're supposed to be doing. They send those little red bags home or those little plastic bags home at the end of the day, every day with their child and say, read for 15 minutes, read for 20 minutes. So they go and sit them down and they make them open the book and read for 20 minutes, right? And they think that we can check the box and say, I've done what you told me to do. So why isn't my kid moving forward in literacy? We have to kind of take a step back and make sure that we're not using language that's only used in school buildings, in boardrooms, in PLC meetings or whatever it is, and really meet parents where they are. Explain to them what and why and how, and not just put a piece of information or a resource or a flyer in their hand and say, go on and conquer the world. But you actually have to make it relevant for them. Show them how to use it, what to do with it, because they will do it.
You know,
you muted yourself again, Kareem.
Sorry about that. Yeah, you mentioned putting that piece of paper in their hand. I want to bring others in on this. That's very important. So, you know, what you're talking about is, so that's about being specific about what's going on, not just saying he's bad.
Mm-hmm.
He's fill in the blank. Okay, and that because that could be communicated by words and by tone and by everything else, that you really don't have time for my child, or you're irritated by my child. That's a different conversation than, you know, when I went over to reading with your son, I noticed that they have a problem with this. I noticed that they struggle with. That's different than she can't sit still. Mm-hmm. She doesn't like whatever the deficit language is. So I'd like to bring others in to this, if you don't mind, and I'll start with Monroe, if you don't mind. You know, we've had initiatives before. This isn't, you know, there have been reading first and other things that have been tried over the course of time. And I'm wondering, you know, we talked about this, you and I touched base on this a little bit earlier. You know, I'm wondering how we can prevent this from just being another pendulum swing. I don't like that language, but another tunnel vision initiative that's not adaptive enough to change as needed. Can you speak a little bit about that? Like what structurally, what can be done to make sure both the districts, whether it's a district level or policy level or the community level, how can we make sure this isn't just the same old, same old?
Well, thanks, Kareem, and thanks to the Belk Foundation for the opportunity to be here and to bring everyone else into this conversation that Kareem and I've had. You know, at Reed Charlotte, you know, we sort of operated community on two levels. One, we're a community initiative outside of the district that, you know, work with a lot of partners. And then a lot of the work we do is with community. And one of the things that I think, you know, how we have approached the work from the very beginning, and we've been around 7 years, I came in with our team asking two core questions. What could we know that other people don't already know? And what could we do that other people haven't already done? Because it's not like just yesterday we discovered reading, right? The National Reading Panel report came out in 2000. There's a lot of work that came out. You know, we didn't have the science of reading in 2000, but we did have scientifically based reading practices. If you look at what they talked about, it looks very similar to science of reading. They didn't have all the brain science stuff that we have today, but you know, we've done a lot of things. And one of the things I think that we could do that will help us to guide us, whether it's in the classroom, outside the classroom, is to take the reading seriously. You know, when we go to give a child a medicine or a vaccine, we don't just create something and give it to them, we test it. And if it works, you know, we give it to them and we keep testing the efficacy and the safety. And if it doesn't work, guess what? We stop and we don't use it. We need to bring that into education, right? And it can't just be, oh, I think I like this program, but we're not using the same rigor and the same evidence, right, that we use when it comes to our children's health. And so I think, Kareem, there's a lot that we both can learn about what works. We can also look at what has been tested and what has either been successful or we have questions about, and develop a knowledge building agenda. I know we have folks from higher ed here, and part of what we need is really clear identified areas where we need to know, do these strategies work? Or we need to develop some new strategies and test them and see if they work and if they're effective. We need an R&D component that helps power this work. But the thing I want to highlight is there's no FDA for education, right? You know, the FDA doesn't let, you know, you bring forward medicines or food that is unhealthy or unsafe. But for education, we don't have that. And we need the FDA for education that helps everyone. Just think about it. We don't all have to read the research reports ourselves to, like, you know, go buy medicine or to get a vaccine. There's somebody doing that for us. And I think we need to take the previous work seriously and ask ourselves, what do we think we know that they didn't know? And are we doing something different that they didn't do that leads us to believe we're going to get a different result? And this applies pre-K 3 or pre-K 12, really, inside the classroom, outside the classroom, and including with our parents. The point you made around change management, I think, is so important. And when we think about what we give our parents to ask them to do, we need to think through, what is it that I need you to do? And how do I support you, whether it's in words or in deed or in resources, to help you successfully take that action? But it cannot be a check the box. I sent the email, I sent the form, but I don't really care if you understand what a RIT score is or not, right?
But you know, Monroe, yes, and as a parent, you know, and I think this is, I'm glad that you went there. As a parent, there is an assumption when I send my child to school, right? They got the clothes on, they're ready to go, they got whatever. I'm thinking the school is gonna handle business. I may not be a reading expert. I mean, I taught for a long time, I taught for a long time, but most parents are trusting the school to do what the school is supposed to do, okay? And they don't have to have a teacher certificate and all that. If I do my job, I get them to school, they fed, they clothed, they're there on time, and it's good, we're gonna be all right. Come find out that the schools may have been doing some things that weren't effective and are just now figuring it out. And so the reason why I mention that is, I'm not blaming this. I'm not blaming, because I said earlier, you know, teachers do what they're told to do. You know, principals do what they demand, they come down and they do it. But how can we make sure that there's enough common ground, enough vulnerability, enough honesty? We're not talking about a rubric, we're talking about the people between people, so that we can get to the real issues at hand. We have to learn how to teach reading, you know, in the education world. We have to push these universities, and for parents, we have to be, I don't know, there's a disconnect there. There's a disconnect there. I'm having a hard time with this one. Devani, can you actually help me out with this? I mean, parents there's gotta be some trust involved.
There's a lot of trust involved, and I'm gonna try real hard to be politically correct as much as I possibly can.
I was trying.
But the one thing that I'm not hearing, Kareem, is the fact that when we talk about family and community engagement, we talk about engaging or empowering our families. Yeah. Typically what happens whether it's literacy or anything else, we are functioning on this this dominant white European model of family engagement, which typically is a one and done. Send the flyer home, I'm the expert, you bring nothing to the table, do what I say. If you don't, then guess what? Your child's not succeeding, I'm gonna point the finger at you, right? There's an inauthentic opportunity for parents to actually participate in this whole literacy journey with their children. Not for the children, but with their children, right? And their educators, their school system. There's a lack of trust when it comes to how much our educators sometimes believe in our parents, that they can actually get the job done. There's a lack of trust that they can comprehend. There's this issue of power culture and this racialized assumption that there's only language proficiency, or there's a lack of knowledge of the educational procedures, right? So there is an inauthentic action around actually engaging parents into this action. So once we take a step back and realize that we're not really meeting our families where they are, because we're not being considerate of culture, we're not being considerate of the fact that we need to use different methods, different approaches, different methods to reach our families, different methods to present the information to them, right? To present the information with them, to put them in positions of power, to share power, invite them to the table so we can really chop it up and figure out exactly what they need and what they want to help grow their children in literacy. We just automatically assume that we know it all, and we're doing things based on the way they've been done for years and years and years, and we're getting the same results. And at the end of the day, the families who are most affected by us, which is our marginalized families most of the time, they end up at the same place, and we say, okay, the parents just don't care, or there is a disconnect. Yeah, there's a disconnect. We got to be willing and really wanting to actually connect with our families.
So Erin, you hear that, and I mean, you're a director of innovation, and I always love talking with folks who have that title, that innovation, because sometimes the innovation is teaching our children to read with what we know works best. It might not be glitzy and glamoury and flashy and adaptive, and it may not be. It may just be we're going to learn how to teach a child to read. And so, how do you balance this fascination with innovation and the nuts and bolts of and non-sexy nuts and bolts of just listen? This is some stuff we got to learn how to do and get better at.
Yeah, that's a great question. And hello, everybody. Great to be here. So yeah, I mean, Kareem, when we think about innovation, certainly we want to think big and think bold about how to best support our students. And in Edgecombe, we say we want all of our kids to become the architects of their lives. And we say that where there's science, like we need to use the science, right? And this is a place that there's science, right? And we know that there's a way students learn to read, and that we should be doing the best that we can to learn as much as we can about that, and to help our students become as successful as possible. Because if they truly are going to design their own futures, literacy is at the foundation of that. And we deeply believe that. Just wanted to speak just very briefly to what you all were just talking about, Devanya and Monroe, about authentically engaging families and really partnering with families. That's something we have been thinking a lot about in Edgecombe County Public Schools over the past, certainly, over the past several years, but for sure this past year, as we've brought students back into the classrooms and are trying to re-engage with our families in a deeper way. Just one practice that we think has some promise. Would love y'all's feedback on that. On this. I think we're just piloting this year, and we certainly haven't cracked the code, but we have gotten some great partners in a group called TNTP. And they are working with us to design a series of literacy sessions that are rooted in the science of reading, that our parents and our educators and students are engaging in together. We're doing this after school, we're doing this during school hours where parents can zoom in, and we're actually helping parents crack the code in what does this paper mean that you're getting home that has your students' M-class data, or has your students' iReady data, and it has these things on it that says they're doing this well in fluency, or they're doing this well in phonemic awareness, and trying to work with our parents to help them understand what that means, and with our teachers, right? Because to your point, our teachers are still learning as well. And so bringing everybody together in a sort of non-threatening space, and really listening to our parents, trying to listen to their concerns, and then giving them opportunities to practice some of this work with their students seems to have some promise. We've had a good turnout from our families this year, and it's just one way that we're thinking about how we can engage with families again in a space that that where we're kind of all on a more level playing field.
Rupen, you see, because you're a reporter, and you see how the pieces do or don't fit together. You see how entities are connecting or are disconnected. So I'm wondering, as you hear all of this, from your vantage point, what are we missing? Because we can all, talk the talk, but at the same time, the kids still aren't reading, and it seems like the state is trying to get its act together. Right, the state is trying to pass a law here. We're going to go training over there. But for every Dr. Alston who leads a building, you have some folks that are still, we're all learning, but people have different beliefs about reading. And so from your vantage point, what is it going to take for us to get on the same page? What are we missing?
Thanks, Kareem. I don't know that I can give one answer, but the thing that comes to mind is to put down the blame. We talked about blame, and I think that if we're going to move forward as a state, This has to be about relationships, inside the school and into the community. And it has to be about partnership. The law that was passed is aimed at pre-K through 5. And a lot of it talks about training in the science of reading, professional development in the science of reading. And it does go into specific practices mandated for schools, but it's not a silver bullet. You talked about that in the keynote, and I've heard that throughout. It's not a silver bullet. There's a lot of things that are going into this. Literacy is not an isolated event. It's something that permeates everything we do in life. And so schools are a place, probably the primary place to wire the brain, to help kids wire their brains for reading, but it's not the only place. And so the communities and the homes are incredibly important. When I started my coverage, I heard blame for on the teachers, that the teachers were using practices that were harmful for kids. It was pervasive across the state. Some practices just weren't helping a lot of kids. But the teachers, a lot of the ones that I spoke to, had never been taught how to teach reading. Yeah. We point blame at the EPPs, but they have their set of challenges. One of the most heartbreaking things was that I kept hearing, from a myriad different places, I kept hearing it's the parents' fault. They're not reading to the kids when they're young. And we know that exposure is important, vocabulary, background knowledge, all of these things are very important to learning how to read. But it was just more blame that was being put around. The parents it's never been their function to wire the kids' brains. I mean, it happens, but the schools are where that happens. And so I think we've got to put down the blame. I think we have got to, Monroe was talking about trying different practices, and seeing what works. I think that has to be a collaboration between the schools and the communities. I think it matters the way that we form these relationships and partnerships. I think the why matters, the how matters, and the what matters. When I think about that, I'm looking at Erin, Swanson, and I'm thinking about Edgecombe County. Their why is very powerful, why they engage with the community and the families. And it's because they acknowledge, families' place and influence and impact on kids who are architects of their own lives. I love that. The how matters. And I think about, Devanya and what they do as the, leader of the Black Child Development Institute. They go to the grocery store, they go to the Melanated Exchange in Charlotte, they meet families where they are. They're not sending them just, emails with jargon or, instructions. They go out there and they meet them and they draw them in with tables filled with books. She told me a story one time of a child that just ran over to the table, and that brought the parent over. The how matters. And then what we do, we have to empower families. They're not professional educators. We have to empower them to help in their child's education. And so I think about what Read Charlotte does and all of the work that Monroe has done around the reading checkup and the tools that he's brought to Mecklenburg County, that he then partners with Devanya with to get them in the hands of parents. And so I think if we can just put down the blame, there is plenty of blame to go around. The media can take the blame too, right? There's plenty of blame to go around. But if we can put that down, and as you said, Kareem, love the children more than, hating on other things, then maybe that's a good way to go forward.
And even as I hear that, and I know it's true, man, it's hard. It's hard. I'll talk about that later, but it's some of this stuff is hard. I think attitude matters. So let's put it this way. What makes it easier? So for the educators out there to be able to move forward without being blamed and have the finger pointed at you and all that, how do you have to come at this with the parents so that parents are receptive and open to the fact that you're still learning, you're still in a learning orientation? What do you need to see? And I can go to Devon with this one. You know, if a teacher is still in process, or principal they're still working it out, they're figuring it out, how should they approach a parent when a parent has a child with needs that aren't being met? You know what I mean? Without it be blowing up and everything, what can they do?
Authenticity, transparency. Authenticity, transparency. We are learning together. Most of the time, based on our experiences, parents will be our teachers' most valuable ally, most valuable resource, and will go to bat for them as long as they understand, they feel like their teacher, their educators are being transparent with them and that they have their child's best interests at heart.
Yes.
They will be their biggest ally, their biggest supporter, and will be the person or the people that will join together to help them get things done. Transparency and understanding that when we have this conversation, there's no teachers on this end and parents on this end, to Rupen's point, and then community members on this end. We're all in this, everybody has a puzzle piece in this picture, right? And so just being that way with our families and being able to see them through a strength-based lens, a strength-based lens, and not have a conversation with them or into a conversation with them that is going to end up in fault finding, to everybody's point. That's how you enter that conversation. That's how you build relationships with the people that are going to do the most for you, that are going to write the letters and show up at the school board meetings and march for you and say, hey, they need more supplies, they need more support, they need more training.
You know, I think sometimes teachers and principals, they can't really imagine that. But what you just said, so instead of hiding the need, instead of trying to play like you know what you don't know, if you're transparent and honest and vulnerable and committed, like it's not just enough to say, I don't know, I can't help it. That's not cool either. It's, I don't know yet, and I need help figuring it out as soon as possible. Can you help me get some help? For those parents, the parents will pave a way because they want access for their child to get help, and it comes through the educator. So I'm wondering, Erin, I know that's not, I mean, you know, we talk about innovation, the idea of parents and teachers working together. It may seem as crazy as it sounds, that may be the innovation, that parents are advocating for teachers to, you understand what I'm saying? How is that possible to work? Because that seems like the next step.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I do think it's on us as educators to reach out to our families and to build those relationships, like Rupen said, because I totally agree. And I think the educators in Edgecombe, and I know throughout the state, would agree that like that's what we need to be doing. You know, that's the foundation of everything, is that we have relationships with our families and with our students, really deeply know our students, and deeply understand, you know, their parents' hopes and dreams for them. So I think our work really needs to turn to that. And, you know, in Edgecombe, one of we use the human-centered design process when we're trying to implement or just think about, you know, finding new opportunities or solving problems. And as you all know, that starts with empathy, right? With really understanding our stakeholders, really understanding what they want and what they need. And I agree, that is innovative, right? Like for so long, educators have said, you know, well, we know best practice, right? We know what's going to work. We have the research behind us. We're just going to do it. And I think it is a shift in mindset to say, we don't have all the answers. Like we need to go to our families. We need to go to our kids and say, again, what is it that you want? What is it that you need? And how can we as educators best support you to get there?
Hey, Kareem, can I jump in on that?
Sure, go ahead.
You know, Erin just was talking about the human-centered design approach in Edgecombe, and you know, they've done so much work listening to the community. And one of the things they found was that there's a lot of trauma in the community.
Yeah.
And they also found among adults that a lot of that trauma came from school, you know, childhood school experiences. And they've become very intentional about becoming responsive to that, and engaging parents in a way to say that, you know, to acknowledge the past harms, but then try to do things differently. And I see a question, you know, in the chat talking about self-efficacy in students and how can we build parent self-efficacy. I want to talk about, you know, this is about lifting up adults too. And when we're talking about that in this specific conversation, we also need to talk about the adult literacy rate. In North Carolina, we have 22 counties where the adult literacy rate, where 30% of adults in those counties have very low literacy levels. And the way that this is coming from a 2019 study by the Barbara Bush Foundation. And the way that they explained the literacy level was to say that these are adults that struggle reading basic sentences. All right, and so we've got 22 counties that have 30% of adults that are living like this. And, you know, if we're going to send forms home, I'm a parent. I've got a middle schooler and an elementary schooler. And I get forms, you know, a lot of times with reading, how I find out the kids are doing, I get, you know, assessment results, you know, but that's not written by the teacher necessarily. It's printed out by, you know, the DIVLS tool or whatever assessment tool they're using. And I've been writing about literacy for 4 years. I've been reading a lot of research. I still don't understand all of it. How are we going to empower all adults to understand what's happening with their kids, but then also acknowledge that we do have adults in the community that have low literacy levels. And I want to say one last thing. I don't mean to hog the camera here, but when we look at those 22 counties with adults, 30% or more adults at low literacy levels, and we look at the 9 counties in North Carolina with the highest percentage of Black population. Okay, we look at the top 9, they're all represented in those 22 counties. 12 of the top 15 in terms of percentage of Black residents are represented in those 22 counties. And this has absolutely nothing to do with intellectual capacity, right? This has to do with when, you know, the penalty for teaching Blacks to read was 27 lashes in North Carolina. It has to do when, you know, Black men had the ability to vote, weaponizing literacy and instituting literacy tests, and state leaders from the past going on record, you know, in public speeches, you know, talking about disparate funding for schools to ensure that the white kids could grow up to pass literacy tests and vote. You know, this isn't about intellectual capacity. This is about weaponizing opportunity and access. And so while we're talking about, you know, solutions, we can't forget that this includes atoning, you know, for a past that maybe people today, you know, had nothing to do with, but that happened, and it has ramifications in kids that are in schools today.
You mentioned one particular group, but I got a direct message from someone in the audience via the foundation. But the question was about, what about kids who speak a second language? You know, I know Monroe, you work in Kansas City with schools there for 15, 20 years. And Erin, in innovation, you know, it's like, we can talk about it, but sometimes there's this added obstacle or opportunity around language, whether it's, and let me qualify that now. Sometimes it may be learning a completely new language. Sometimes it might be a dialect of English that has to also be worked with so that kids get what they need in school. How does anyone here can speak to like the ways to kind of reach literacy goals with that added layer of both parents, English skills, reading, writing, communication, and then also the kids? Anybody?
I can tell you about a pilot program that's happening in North Carolina. We've got our elementary teachers are using M-Class to assess students in reading and literacy, and M-Class or Amplify has developed this Lectura assessment platform. And what it does is it assesses students' reading levels or reading skills in both English and Spanish. So these are in communities with, you know, a lot of kids that you know, in Spanish-speaking homes, Spanish-first homes. And the reasoning is that sometimes with ESL kids, you'll take these assessments and it looks like there is, you know, deficiencies in reading skills, and really it's just language, it's English that is the issue. And so what they're trying to pilot is testing kids in Spanish first homes in both languages. And what they're finding is that it does reduce, you know, sort of false positives, I guess. I don't know, misleading results as far as, you know, reading difficulties versus, you know, language disparity.
Yeah, Kareem, I would just say that, like all of us, if you think about it, you know, whether you're, you know, whether your challenge is second language acquisition or acquiring English for the first time, we all, you know, started off as English language learners. And so, you know, we all, the phonemes that we all have to master are the same. We have the same 26 letters, you know, correct letter sounds. The challenge, of course, for children that are coming, you know, without that background and including their families, of course, is just, you know, starting from a different foundation. And so how do we, I'm going to go back and sort of repeat what I said earlier. We actually need a lot of really good intentional work around how do we help kids accelerate their second language acquisition. There was sort of a similar version in National Reading Panel report that was focused on this topic. I think it's like 15 years old or so. And one of the ideas they lifted up in there is particularly focusing on helping these children master phonemes correctly and really looking at, you know, what are the sounds in their native language, what are the sounds in English, and how can you accelerate that? I've not seen anyone who's intentionally worked on that idea, for example. But this is an example where I'd say, like, we really could benefit from some really strong R&D work. And I'm building on what Rupen was suggesting, really looking at what is the data telling us? How do we do rapid cycle testing? How do we, you know, do what Erin was talking about, human-centered design, both for the kids, but also the folks that are working with them and their families? And then how can we, you know, develop a knowledge building agenda to like figure out what works? We know that children all the time come to our country not knowing English and learn how to speak English and read. My wife was one of them. She came to this country when she was 5 and didn't speak a lick of English, and you wouldn't know it today. But the question is we need to figure out how to systematize that, how to help more children. And then, of course, depending on how old you come, that also is, you know, what your age is when you arrive, that also impacts you, right? It's very different if you come when you're, you know, 2 or 5, and then if you come with your 15. And so I think, again, to help support our educators and our families, we need to have an agenda because we know this is an important and growing part of our population in North Carolina. And so, you know, we need to attack this problem aggressively and really help our, you know, districts and communities across the state with really high quality solutions that we are intentionally working to test and continuously develop. But then back to the point you made at the very beginning, Kareem, we got to pay attention to both the technical aspect as well as the adaptive aspect, which means we also need to really focus on how well does this work across a variety of areas. We can do this, but we've got to be intentional. We got to bring the same sort of rigor and intentionality that we take to other parts of our social life.
So I'm gonna ask a question that I would like 3 of you to answer. I always like to make an ask. And so I want you to think, Vanya, Erin, and Monroe, and Rupen, we might bring you in too at the end. We'll see how it goes. But the question is, what do you need? So to Devanya, what do parents need from educators? What do we need? What do parents need? Because they're listening. And it's important to be explicit in making that. There's one thing when the school district asks you to do something, another thing when the parents ask you to do something. What do we need? from educators. And then to Erin, from wearing your lens, your hat of innovation, what do teachers need? What do our educators need? From either be from parents or from publishers or from superintendents or the principal, what do they need? And then I know some people in the chat are probably saying, I know the answer to these. But in Monroe, with your experience at systems level, not just here in North Carolina, but also in another state, the perspective of, for an initiative to actually thrive and kids to grow at the systems level, what is needed? I just want to let it out. And then Rupen, as you're listening to these three things, if you hear a gap, and then at the end, I'd love for you to be able to interject. So Devani, I'll start with you. What do parents need for this reading initiative? What do we need from the school systems?
So hold on to your seats because I'm about to give you like some mind-blowing stuff right now. Are you ready?
We're ready.
Authentic partnerships. That's what they need. They need impactful and meaningful, culturally relevant and rich, intentional opportunities for engagement. Partnerships, relationships. We need a group of people, a body of people, a community, a district to burden the system and not our families. Burden the system, not the families.
Now, hold on, before I get to Erin, what you just said right there, if you could just a little bit more. So for example, when you say burden the system, not our families, can you give me an example? Like what?
A beautiful.
I need you to come on with that.
A beautiful example of that, Kareem, would be exactly what Monroe and Rupen just described for us. When we're talking about our English language learners, right? We don't put the burden on our families. We send that little map score, that piece of paper with that little man running across the top of that page for those map scores.
Right.
And we say, we give it to them and we want them to figure it out. Figure it out. What does this mean for your kid? No, that's burdening the families. If we really want them to understand what's on that piece of paper, if we really want them to understand where they fit into this whole picture and what they can do at home to support their children or enhance what they're already doing at home, because 9 times out of 10, everybody's doing something. It might be called something different, it might look something different, but everybody's bringing something to the table. Then it's our responsibility. It's the system's responsibility to shift and make sure that we're making provisions for our families so that they can show up their best and their brightest, and they can send their children to school ready as they do every single day. Burden the system, not the families. Relationships are key in this thing. Authentic relationships, not just checking boxes. We like to say we're working on equity and we want to build and bring our families in, and we create this table without them. Invite them in, ask them. I think Erin said it earlier a couple of times. She said, what are your hopes, your dreams, your values? What do you want for your children? Let's start there and figure out how we work together to move our children. That's what they need.
Thank you. And Erin, from the perspective of our educators, both, the system and also the parents, what do they need?
Yeah. So great. And I'll just build on what Devanya shared. I think our teachers, our educators want that partnership as well, and really want that authentic team, right? Like we are working together for kids. And I think what educators need from policymakers is they need the time and the flexibility in their schedules to be able to do that, right? I think educators right now, you've read all the articles, right? People are leaving the profession. People feel strapped. People are stressed about being in a classroom from 8 to 3 and having, to cover classes because others are out. And I think what we need is the autonomy. We need the ability to innovate within our districts, within our schools, so that we can create flexible schedules for teachers, so that we can say to teachers, a big part of your job is getting out there, making home visits, calling families, having meetings with kids, having meetings with parents, and really getting to know your students so that you can best serve each individual child. And right now, I feel like educators, we have not built the system so that educators can do that really, really critical work. And that's what we need, is the flexibility to do that.
Thank you. Thank you. Monroe, at a system level, what's needed?
I would say we need to invest in the R&D capacity of our local systems, by which I mean people and organizations, to identify problems, to test solutions, and to continuously improve. The science of reading is no different in Mecklenburg County and Edgecombe County. We have the same number of phonemes, maybe. We have the same, 26 letters to the alphabet, but the context is different. So we need to invest in the local capacity to do that R&D work, to identify problems, test solutions, and continuously improve, so that we can empower a lot of other people. That's the system level capacity building and investments we need, in each and every one of the counties in our community, in our state.
Thank you. Rupen, having heard those three things that each of your panelists, co-panelists have mentioned, are there any things that you would add to that?
So I would of course co-sign all three. I think when we talk about school and community relationships, and when I say community, I'm including the families at the forefront of that. When we talk about those relationships, it often falls on the schools to figure it out, and there's good reason, I think, for that. But we forget that the schools and the families are not the only parties that are benefiting from all of this. Okay, the state is going to benefit with the future of its citizenry, and I think that we need greater state support. When we have mandates, they need to be funded. If we want them to be applied equitably, they need to be funded. But when I'm thinking, specifically about community gatherings that bring schools and communities together, there's no reason that the state can't help with that as well. Schools are already overburdened. There's only so much that we can ask. And it's often predictable which schools are most burdened and have the least capacity. And that just, it just creates further inequities. And so I would bring the, state leaders closer to this table. Our General Assembly was overwhelmingly in favor of Senate Bill 387. But like I said, that's not the silver bullet, right? We need a lot of other supports. And so we need them engaged to stay engaged and to fund some of what it'll take to actualize that engagement.
What about, I focus less on race and class than a lot of people, but I'm not crazy. And I know it matters. And most of our teachers are white women, and they're trying to work it out. They're really trying to work it out. And the demographics are challenging. I don't know if you all heard the keynote, but the first thing my cousin was talking, he said, people sometimes listen to or respond better to people that they identify with or respect for some reason. And he was talking about a different context, but it's the same kind of thing. There is this identity challenge that we have. How can we get our educators to relate enough to our kids to be effective, giving them what they need to give them, facilitating what they need to facilitate, engaging with the parents the way they need to engage? How can we get them to be comfortable enough in their own skin and knowledgeable enough about somebody else's to be able to do the job the way it needs to be done? That's just a point blank question, because it matters. And I'm hearing it from all parties. I'm hearing it from teachers who are wondering, and they feel kind of at odds. I'm doing the best I can. I can't help I'm white. It is what it is. Black kids saying, I can't help I'm Black. It is what it is. But if they're not lining up in a way that's productive, it can be a challenge. Because so anybody, and I'll throw this out to the floor, is anybody be able to speak to the racial aspect of things and how we can make sure that that is not an inhibitor, how we can actually turn it into a strength, some of these dynamics that we have out there?
I don't have the answer, Kareem, but I'm going to underscore what you said. I've actually seen some really high quality experimental research that actually shows and demonstrates a link between teacher bias about students' ability and their reading scores. And that when you're able to remove that bias, that you actually see a positive impact. So I know we've had, I know it's easy to make the argument that you're making, and I'm not disagreeing with it, but what I'm saying is there is really strong concrete evidence that bias, the beliefs about children's ability and what they can do as it relates to reading, shows up on students' reading achievement. So figuring out the answer to this question you're posing is important because it has consequential impacts for student achievement.
Among other things, not just student achievement, but their identity, their self-concept, their, their sense of peace, joy, love, happiness, and all the rest. And to be able to hold their head up and look in the mirror without thinking that they're some kind of way defective. But as I said, teachers are having to wrestle with this too. Does it mean that I can't teach Black children because I'm white? I don't think anybody's saying that. But what are the competencies? What do you have to be willing and able to do so that you can do that effectively and be a positive support for kids, in addition to mastering content? Maybe I'll speak a little bit to that at the end. But does anybody else want to take a shot at that before we pivot? Because I think we have to pivot in a second. Anyone else?
One of the things that I think about a lot is, we just have this need to let go of what we think is normal. What's normal to me might not be normal for somebody else. There is no normal. There is no normal. And we just have to be courageous enough to let go of that and be curious. And then it goes back to what Devanya was saying, that authenticity and transparency. I don't know. That's hard to say sometimes, but it's powerful. I don't know, but I'd like to learn.
Okay.
But I will say also that, that's for the system we have now. But, part of the solution is diversifying the teacher workforce.
Yeah, that's what Linda was saying.
So maybe while we are working on really finding an answer or a solution to that question, Kareem, and diversifying the teacher workforce and reminding people to do a little bit of self-evaluation, right? A little self-reflection to kind of understand how we reinforce racialized dynamics when it comes to inequities in education and why these things show up, in the way our children are taught to read or not taught to read, the way our parents are engaged or not engaged, invited. We can be lighting a fire over here to burn the old system down while Monroe, Rupen, and Erin and everybody else works on rebuilding a new one. Maybe we can do that. Burn it down because it sits on a lot of racist, the old guard, old ways of doing things, old mindsets and ways of thinking. That makes it really hard to answer that question.
And I would just really quickly, I would just add that I'm grateful for, our school board, our superintendent, our principals in Edgecombe. And I know there's folks like this throughout the state that are encouraging those conversations to happen in our district and in our schools. And, where white teachers are just really having to deeply consider their own biases that they're bringing to the table, where we're talking about, our identities and how those identities influence our work. Those conversations need to happen, and they need to happen in our schools, and we need to continue those conversations in addition to recruiting more teachers of color to work with our kids.
Kareem, I'm going to just jump in time-wise and thank you and thank the panel, Rupen, Erin, Devanya, Monroe. Great insights on ways we can strengthen our literacy. Kareem, I'm going to look back at you now and just say we spent a couple of hours. We've gone from the morning. We're now going into the afternoon here on the East Coast. And reflect a little bit on some of your takeaways. You may want to reinforce some things. I know I've got 3 or 4 pages of notes, but the first thing I wrote down was, did you know, yes, but. And there have been some great insights from the Guilford panel as well as the community and parent panel. Anything you want to share?
Yes, thank you for giving me the chance to do it. I got about 5 or 6 minutes, so let me go quick. I'm glad to have the opportunity to do it. So a few things, Yes, but. So first thing is, I think people have to understand that if teachers knew better, they'd have done better. That's the first positive assumption. The first positive assumption is if educators knew what to do, they would have done it. That's an assumption, okay, that parents are making. And I think that it's reasonable to make. And the reality is that the reason why transparency is so important is because while educators, sometimes we feel, I can't let them know that I don't know. Oh no, it's actually the opposite. Parents are much more receptive to hearing, I didn't know, than they are to thinking, you mean to tell me they actually knew about the science of reading and they did something different? You just consider that. Because the positive assumption is that if people know how to do it, they'll do it. So saying in that context, I don't know is actually okay. Second thing is curriculum. People mention curriculum. Look, you can have a great curriculum, but some of these curriculum out there are so hard and cumbersome to do and implement that you might as well not have one. And I can be critical of it because I don't care. You know, and some of the most popular curriculums out there right now are ridiculous with 10 and 15 books. I don't care if it's science reading or not. You asking teachers to stay up all night long, you know, 5 to 6, 7 days a week, for real, to prepare and come in and give the kids what they want. Then on the back end, you guilt trip them about how the impact is. You can't do that. You gotta find something that's usable. When I say usable, that means you can plan for it and be prepared on a daily basis without, you know, losing all your hair the first year. That's just the reality. And some of these curriculum, even some that are used in bigger counties and cities and districts in North Carolina, it's problematic, even if it does align with the science reading. The third thing is, and that pain. So I think someone mentioned forgiveness, or maybe it was Rupen talked about how not blaming each other. And we can't be soft. We gotta put on our big boy and big girl pants. The pain is real. People are hurting. And I started off talking about showing a clip of my cousin. Look, man, that's my guy. You know, we grew up together. You know, have him incarcerated for 20 some odd years, 23 years. You know, smart as he wants to be, nice now, he's married, family, and all this type of stuff. And I'm like, it was unnecessary, just unnecessary trauma. Now, he could read. He had some other stuff going on, but all throughout the country. And if it's not a kid going to jail, it's what business could they have started that they didn't? What innovation could they have made? What job could they have created? Whatever. We all lose when our kids don't get what they need. But I need to be honest about that. Sometimes, yes, we want parents to come and have their best hat on and be nice and all that. Sometimes, man, it just hurts. It hurts. And we have to be tough enough to understand it's not on us. We're part of a bigger system that has contributed to this trauma and this pain. And we can't, you know, social emotional learning or whatever the buzzy thing is of the day, mindfulness, that's all fine and well. But to contribute to equity and social justice, we got to learn how to teach our kids to read and be willing to do that work. And that will help the forgiveness to happen and the grace to be given on all sides. And the last thing I'll say is, on that race and class question at the end, I've wrestled with that. And I've come to the conclusion as a father, you know, I've got 3 kids. I want them to be culturally competent and all that. Look, just teach the babies to read. Just teach the babies to read. I don't need, you know, listen, I'm all for a good Dr. King story, like the next man. You know, I'm Morehouse 94. I'm all about it, believe me. But we can't have, we have to, you gotta teach the kids to read. And we can work out the rest of that stuff later. And that's where coalition happens. Don't get all caught up in critical race theory. Our kids can't even read the theory. We don't need, look, we just have to teach our kids to read so that they can begin to discern and make sense of this world that we're screwing up so badly. And I say that as hopefully I make a lot of it, but I do want people to try to reach their parents and their students and to become culturally competent. That's important. And it is important to diversify the teacher workforce. But if you do all those things and yet we're unable to give them the gift and the skill of literacy, it's a pernicious effort, because what we're doing is a different kind of harm. Somebody that actually looks like me is contributing to my demise. We have got to get literacy right. And that means if you got to sound the alarm and ask the Belk Foundation for some money to go down and get some training, or your school district or the principal or whoever, do what you have to do. But it's not about just becoming a race warrior and a social justice advocate. Like my cousin said in the beginning, sometimes we contribute to social injustice because we're so busy caught up in the scrum and the wokeness that we forget to do the most essential thing, which is give children their wings on earth, their wings, the ability to read. And so I just leave that. I know that's probably not a popular thing to say. I'm Black and I'm proud like everybody else. And at the same time, hey, Joe Blow or Johnny May White teacher, if you can teach a child to read, hey, we can be friends. We can be friends. We're gonna get along on those grounds. And we're also probably gonna get along with the dyslexic community, with the second language community, all these different communities, because we all want similar things for our kids, to put them in a position to be successful. And we know it takes time and sacrifice and resources and lack of sleep and all that to get the training and skills to get this right. So with that regard, that's what I would just leave folks with. We want to be racially competent, but at the same time, let's teach the babies to read. We'll go from there.
Kareem, I take it your primary point is first things first.
First things first.
Let's get reading right.
Yeah.
And good things are going to happen. One thing that you led in with was we can mandate things. We can tell people what to do, but change management is everything in implementation and gaining commitment. Any final thoughts around that?
All I would say is this is a time for leadership. And it's not, there are some careerists out there, and I have nothing wrong with, there's nothing wrong with ambition, go do what you, but this is a time for leadership. And it does not matter what position you have in the building, you can be a leader. I worked at high school where the most popular person on campus was the custodian. Everybody respected the custodian. Everybody, from the staff to the kids to the parents. He ran that school with love. It's just the way he carried himself. And the kids knew that he loved them. Right? This is a high school. But what I'm trying to say is that this is a season of learning and leadership. And sometimes you have to lead from behind, where you are at your grade level, in your PTA meeting, on your school board, on the foundation, to put literacy front and center and have a no-nonsense attitude. I mean, you can do that and still not be a jerk. Have a no-nonsense attitude about what is and what is not negotiable. And literacy can't be negotiable. So this is a time for leadership. Don't worry about your position. In fact, if people see that spark in you, a lot of times they'll be like, hey, you ever think about being a XYZ official? Because leadership is in short supply. I was so happy that we had Dr. Contreras on here earlier. We need more like her, but we need Dr. Contreras in all the different roles in the building and in all the different stakeholder groups. We need people who are willing to say, no, I'm not going along to get along. I'm actually going to do this. I'm going to prepare this way. We're going to work on this together. I'm a partner with people who I don't even get along with half the time because it's in the best interest of kids, and I'm going to be a leader in that regard. So that's what I would say on that.
Yeah. Positive change starts with leadership.
That's right.
And it's got to come from the heart. Kareem, we can't thank you enough. Our expert panels, and I need to put a plug in for the staff here at the Belk Foundation for putting this group together. It's been an awesome couple of hours for me, and I know for most all of the participants. And I'd like to end with just a point of humility and say, if you have any more ideas for how the Belk Foundation can continue to push this ball, please share it with Johanna Anderson or myself. We're very interested in helping the state of North Carolina move forward with literacy. And I want to wish everybody here a wonderful week. We've got great ideas and strategies to